I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session. And our moderator is Nadia Bilbassy-Charters. She grew up in Gaza. She's the chief correspondent at Al-Arabiya. Nadia has been working as a foreign correspondent for over 20 years. Since 2003, she has been based in Washington, D.C. for Al-Arabiya TV and the Middle Eastern Broadcast Center. She's covered 2 presidential elections and reported from Guantanamo on the cases of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other 9/11 suspects. She has interviewed many influential politicians, including President George W. Bush, Prime Minister Tony Blair, President Mahmoud Abbas, General Colin Powell, and U.S. Secretary of State Rice, among others. So now I'd like to turn the discussion over to Nadia.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you all for coming. I was told that this is one of the most popular panels. So panelists, pressure is on. I've been doing this for 3 years almost now. And I honestly believe that as a Palestinian, as just Evan said, grew up under Israeli military occupation, the only way we can go forward is through talking. And even if your enemy is brutal, the best way to go forward is trying to present our point of view to the other side. And I'm not talking just about negotiations, but I'm talking about one-on-one, us, all of us. And through these bonds, through the introduction of our collective suffering, if you want, through our demands, we can forge the lasting peace. And I was traveling with President Obama in the last trip to the Middle East, and he was addressing the Israeli people, and he said, you guys have to put pressure on me, because if you don't put pressure on me, I'm not going to act. And he's absolutely right, because pressure is public opinion. And in a democracy, public opinion is taken into account. So here we are. I hope after this panel we'll all be inspired. We'll go forward, and we're trying to change one person's mind. I hope more than one person, but it will be good enough for me. Let me start. Of course, today every year we're trying to look at different perspectives and different topics. Today we're going to talk about the future of Palestinian politics. I'm very glad that J Street always include us, and as I always say, the only way we can go forward is through talking to each other. So I think if we talk about the future of Palestinian politics, or even politics in general, I think it rests on 3 important factors: leadership, division, strategy, and of course the building of the institutions that started when former Prime Minister Salam Fayyad started the project in 2009. Leadership, I think we have the Palestinian Authority represented by President Abbas, who has committed himself to a non-violent path to end the conflict. And he has demonstrated that, I think, for decades. But even last few days in the UN, he was addressing the General Assembly, he said that again. And he spoke one-on-one with President Obama as well, and he mentioned that the negotiation that was enthusiastically started by Secretary Kerry will go on, despite of Israeli provocations. And I think what he means by that is the continuation of the settlement activities that will be a huge obstacle to a contiguous and viable Palestinian state. So you have a president who's committed to nonviolence as a method to achieve the aspiration of the Palestinian people. And of course, we have the division. So when we talk about the Palestinian Authority, we're talking really about one party, which is Fatah, that's the de facto governor of the West Bank. And you have Hamas, who's in Gaza. So you have 2 parties, and everybody else really just, kind of fizzle around. So we have even the Palestinian diaspora in the outside, which is represented by the Palestinian National Council. They very much on the side. But so you have 2 major big parties that control the politics of Palestine nowadays. And of course you have the strategy, which is since Oslo, almost 20 years ago till now, the negotiation that's being pursued by the PLO and by the PA has not really resulted much in tangible results for an average Palestinian to say, I really believe in that the two-state solution is the only way we can go forward. So this is what we're trying to hear now today from the panel, that is this option still viable till today? And of course, when the Palestinians get frustrated by the Israelis' continuation of building of settlements and the lack of response from the Netanyahu government, they resort to another method we have seen last year in particular, which is to go to the UN. Basically, they're saying we're going to try to issue some kind of resolution from the Security Council, or we go to the General Assembly. And if not, we're going to go and apply for membership with other UN organizations that has huge implication on Israel as well, like UNESCO and WHO and the rest. So have been really more or less the three important points that we have seen dominating the Palestinian politics for the last 20 years, and of course I'm trying to speak only in 5 minutes because the time I'm allowed. But in the bigger picture as well, we have something called building the institution, building the future of a Palestinian state, that once we have an agreement, we will be ready to step in. And I hope, and we're going to hear today from the panel, is did we really build this institution? Are these institutions the one we want? Because the state that we want, or at least I want, is a democratic state, that we have an independent judiciary, that we have free media, that we have respect for law, that we have equal treatment for all citizens. So were we able to build these institutions despite the huge restriction, and one of the biggest restriction, of course, and the biggest violator of human rights is military occupation. So despite all these restrictions, were we able to go forward or not? This is what we're going to hear from the panel today. So let me introduce the three panelists here on our session today. And I'm going to start with Hussam Zomlot, who is the Executive Deputy Commissioner for the Commission of International Affairs in Palestine. I also have Samih El-Abed, who is the former Minister of Public Works and Housing for the Palestinian Authority. He is also a member of the Palestinian negotiation team, or was actually, and quite a few of them, Camp David in particular. And we have al-Omari. And Ghaith, of course, he's a well-known face in Washington, and he's the Executive Director of the American Task Force on Palestine. Before that, he served in various positions with the PA, including the Director of the International Relations Department in the Office of the Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas. So I'm trying to be very strict with timing so we can have more of dynamic discussion from the audience and from the panel. And I will start with Samih here to give us about 15 to 20 minutes of outlining his position or his understanding of Palestinian politics today. So with that, I'll start with Samih.
Thank you very much, and thanks to J Street for allowing me to be here with you. It's a pleasure to be here and to try to speak about the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian aspiration for the future, joining that with you. There are the theme of this panel. They were talking about the conflict about going to the international community as unilateral issue, and also about the leadership of the future leadership of the Palestinians. So the conflict paradigm is simple. The Palestinians went to the to internationalize the conflict is intended really to create leverage vis-a-vis Israel. This is done by joining international organizations, by calling for full and effective implementation of international law, and by pushing third states to implement their obligations under international law and under their own laws and regulations. It is important to note here that the PLO moved to the international arena to secure international recognition of a state of Palestine. We believe in the two-state solution. And this was in response to the failure of past negotiation attempts, the expansion of settlements, and the construction of the Israeli wall, which was aimed at eroding the 1967 border. It was not part of a dual strategy that began in 1993, as assumed in the questions guiding the panel, or an attempt at conflict. This move is what transpired as a result of the failure associated with the peace process, and particularly with the non-implementation of many of Israel's signal obligations or signed obligations, including its commitment in Oslo I, Oslo II, Taba, the roadmap, among others. The other paradigm is cooperation, includes the building of effective service-based, highly structured institutions, something which Prime Minister Fayyad, under the auspices of Abu Mazen, the President Abu Mazen, they did for some time. It includes the constitution of security coordination and economic cooperation in the day-to-day dealing with Israel, as well as continued pursuit of a negotiation settlement with Israel. In other words, this paradigm serves as a way to maintain the quiet and not to disrupt the status quo. The current Palestinian leadership has pursued both cooperation with Israel and the support of the international community on a multilateral level. President Mahmoud Abbas has sought recognition internationally while building the institution of a state and maintaining order under security cooperation. In fact, both fed into each other. Without maintaining the calm, without maintaining security, Palestine would not have received the overwhelming support it did in the United Nations General Assembly, including the positive vote of most European states. Also, without such policies, the EU would not have moved more forcibly to implement its own laws and responsibilities under international law by issuing the recent guidelines. It shows that while there are inherent tension between the two paradigms, they serve to bolster each other. Gaining political support abroad, specifically with Western countries, traditionally more supportive of Israel, necessitates the degree of flexibility and pragmatism that the Palestinian leadership has shown by maintaining security coordination and by working effectively with donor community to build up the institution of modern state. It is therefore important to recall that these two approaches are not mutually exclusive per se, and in fact are in many ways interrelated. The inherent conflict between both approaches lies in the strategic decision facing the Palestinian leadership in the medium run. These include pursuing negotiation, reconciliation with Hamas by restructuring the PLO, foregoing negotiation in their current form and structure, and whether to pursue membership and other international organizations, including many of those were mentioned before from Nadia. One should also be mindful that the two approaches offered are not the only ones in the context of the current situation. Popular peace resistance as a possible and viable strategy is still alive. On the ground, however, minimally, villages such as Nabi Saleh, Bel'ain, Na'lin, and Masara continue to hold daily and weekly peaceful protests. This strategy could be applied more widely and should not be neglected as a viable option in the minds of the Palestinian leadership, especially in the case of total breakdown in the negotiation. As regards the absence of the Palestinian Prime Minister, as the word said about the absence of the ex-minister, Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, this is something that really we do not accept. It's the challenges in the Palestine and in resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict transcend any single person. The skill and talent of individuals leading the government is crucial. However, no amount of skill and talent coupled with the occupation can equal progress. Prime Minister Fayyad, under the leadership of President Abbas, deserve credit for building the institutional capabilities of a Palestinian state over the years and for achieving a great deal under difficult circumstances. But his efforts ultimately could not be sustained without a rollback of Israeli occupation. All of the Fayyad effort to develop the institution capability of a state are imminent risk of falling apart if the conditions on the ground do not fundamentally change. Moreover, it is not a perceived failure for a technocratic approach per se that is at issue. It is the entire interim process as it came to light that it is criticized in Palestine. The process was not governed by principles of international law. It did not move towards a clearly defined end state, and in effect, it was open-ended. Major investments in the PA institutions and governance require clarity in the outcome of the process, and enough guarantees that the process itself will not be exploited cynically. Finally, before detailing what future holds, we must outline the current leadership political objectives. First, ending the conflict with Israel by establishing a Palestinian state on the 1967 border and East Jerusalem as a capital, and a just resolution to the refugee problem in accordance with international law. Second, halting Israeli expansion and erosion of the two-state solution by continuing building illegal settlements, the regime of occupation and control in the West Bank. Third, maintaining leadership popularity and legitimacy within its own constituency. Fourth, reconciliation with Hamas. There are also points in which guiding the Palestinian behavior, both cooperation and movement toward international relationship, need or that will help for such goals, to achieve such goals. And although the question rightly assumed inherent intention between the two approaches, the Palestinian leadership has navigated both with delicacy. For the time being, the Palestinian leadership has disqualified other options. These include armed resistance, adoption of highly critical position vis-à-vis Israel, like total boycott, dissolution of the PNA, and annulment of Oslo. All these was held by the Palestinian leadership in order to continue the process of negotiation with Israel. And the Palestinian leadership has decided to pursue negotiation, and in order to do so, it for the next 6 or 9 months, as was signed by or advocated by Secretary Kerry and President Obama, will be fully and unequivocally committed for them. On Palestinian unity and negotiation, the PLO remains the only body authorized to negotiate with Israel. Engaging with Hamas is critically important, as an agreement cannot be implemented if Hamas is opposed to it. However, Hamas has accepted the PLO's authority to negotiate and has indicated that it would accept an agreement that was approved by the Palestinian public through a referendum. This gives the Palestinian leadership the political space to implement an agreement and the popular mandate to sign one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're on time, actually. I think we need to move the mic. So basically, you're saying that negotiation and going to the UN are not mutually exclusive. So let's see what Ghaith has to say. So we're going to pass the mic towards you.
You can have my coffee.
Let's see how the panel goes before I decide. First of all, thank you very much for J Street for having me here. It's a real pleasure, and it's great seeing this crowd here. This is a good sign that, as far as I'm concerned, the support for a two-state solution within the pro-Israel community continues to be at the core of this community. Thank you. And of course, it's an honor, a real honor to share the panel with such a distinguished group. I'm going to try to talk about the future of Palestinian politics in 15 minutes. I'll see what I can do with that. But before I start, I want to start with a couple of opening comments. The first being, I'm going to approach this panel from a purely domestic Palestinian politics point of view. I will try to analyze some of the trends that happen within Palestinian politics. However, this is not about foreign policy. Yet, I have to point out from the beginning that foreign policy, particularly the issue of establishing a Palestinian state, the issue of liberation, continues to be and will always be the basic variant or variable defining Palestinian politics. Ultimately, whichever Palestinian movement can promise credibly to bring liberation to the Palestinian public, it will gain ascendancy. So that will always have to be part of the underlying current of, as we look at Palestinian politics, we should never forget the issue of the occupation and the issue of creating a Palestinian state. The second point that I want to start with is what you did not mention in my introduction, is that I'm a lawyer. And by training as lawyers, we're always trained, we're always trained to look for the worst. So as I describe the Palestinian politics, I will actually be trying to look for, the points of tension, the vulnerabilities, the cleavages within the Palestinian body politic. It doesn't mean that I believe that today, as we speak, and for the purposes of the negotiations, that I think that the Palestinian system is vulnerable, is fragile, is going to collapse in a couple of days. No, I think it's quite stable today. Yet I think there are some issues that are worth keeping an eye on if we want to understand where Palestinian politics is moving. I'm going to touch on, try to describe very briefly what's happening within Hamas, within Fatah, the prospects of reconciliation, the issue of governance, and maybe a couple of words about, again, going back to foreign policy and how we can complete that circle. I would start by talking about the easiest one here, Hamas. Oh, before I do that, though, one last point. We're talking about the future of Palestinian leadership. Remember, zoom out a little bit. We are in the Arab Spring. If someone were to ask me on June 25th to talk about the future of Egyptian leadership, my presentation would have been completely irrelevant a week from that point. So as we talk about this, remember, things are actually very fragile and very changing at the moment, but these are beyond what analysts can look at. These are schisms that none of us actually understand, and therefore we can't talk about. But let me talk about Hamas. And the reason why I'm saying that Hamas is an easy topic today is that Hamas is in shock. Hamas is in retreat. Hamas is in a situation that it is so internally absorbed that it is going to be ineffectual on the national scene for a while. And that is because of what's happening to the Islamist movement, regionally speaking. The collapse of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has created a fundamental paradigm shock to the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Hamas has had, by definition, to be affected by that. Add to that the fact that Hamas is messing around with domestic Egyptian politics, which continues until today, with Egyptian security concerns, which continue until today, means that Hamas also finds itself regionally isolated. Qatar is in the retreat. Turkey is trying to figure out how it's going to position itself these days, and Hamas finds itself with no allies. Hamas right now faces one or two basic questions, or two basic dynamics. The first dynamic is the struggle over power between the external leadership in the diaspora, the names that many of you recognize, Mish'al, Abu Marzouk, these kind of people, who tend to be more sensitive to the regional changes and the diplomatic interests and issues. And then you have the guys in Gaza, primarily those close to the military wing, but not only that. And they're trying to see who's going to be the center of gravity in Hamas, and almost by definition, whatever position adopted by the diaspora will be contradicted by the guys in Gaza and vice versa. So until this power tension is resolved, I cannot see a Hamas policy that is coherent. The second issue that's facing Hamas today is the issue of what regional patrons. They bet on Egypt, they bet on Qatar, they lost. Now they're looking to see where to go. There are voices that are talking about going close to Iran again, but that comes with a price. That comes with a big price, not only vis-a-vis the West and us here in this hall, but vis-a-vis the Sunni world and the Sunni Arabs and the Sunni Palestinians, who actually will not be particularly comfortable with a close Hamas-Iran look. So this is for Hamas. I see it in paralysis. Fatah is also in a crisis of sorts. I want to start by saying, though, that Fatah as a label continues to be very appealing. I don't know how many of you here are familiar with British soccer. But in England, there is a team called Manchester United. And you are born into Manchester United. And it can be a good team, and it can be a crap team, and it could be a good season and a bad season. You are a Manchester United fan. And Fatah is like that. Fatah is a label that most of us Palestinians grew up knowing Fatah. And therefore, it's still very appealing. And it's still, I think, the most, as a label, the most widely accepted within the public. Yet, as an organization, it is facing a challenge. And it's facing some problems, which are internal. Fatah, I find it, for the last few years, has been extremely stale. There isn't really much of a chance, if you're a young person joining Fatah today, there isn't much of a chance of going anywhere within that movement. This movement right now is based on a balance of power that is very static, and if shaken, can be extremely destabilizing for the organization. And I think this is the problem that Fatah is facing right now. How do you rejuvenate while maintaining the strength of your label? I believe we are not there yet. I believe to get to that point, you need not only elections within Fatah, but you need to reconceptualize the role of Fatah. Fatah, like many organizations that were in power for too long, and by the way, this is not purely a Palestinian issue. We saw it with the Democrats here or with the Labour Party in the UK pre-Blair. When you're in power for too long, you tend to become too complacent. And I think this is where Fatah is. In terms of reconciliation, I would say that I personally believe that, first of all, reconciliation is not going to happen. It's not going to happen because from a paradigm point of view, you have two irreconcilable paradigms. You have Hamas talking about a two-state solution. Sorry, what am I saying? Hamas talking about one state. Sorry, it's too early in the morning. I need the coffee now. Hamas talking about one state, the state of Palestine, over historic Palestine, arrived to, through violence, through the destruction of Israel, to create a theocracy. That's one paradigm. Another paradigm talks about a two-state solution, arrived at, through negotiations and diplomacy, to create, a secular state, possibly conservative, yet very secular state. I can't see how you square that circle. And I see right now in Palestine, and of course add to this, the existence of weapons, particularly with Hamas, with militias. And when you have weapons and politics, the two don't get along, don't marry that well. We saw it in Lebanon and elsewhere. What we're seeing today in Palestine is something that we've seen in many other national movements, new states, when you have competing irreconcilable paradigms. And one of those will have to win, and one will have to lose. The winner, of course, the loser will not disappear, will have to come in as a junior partner. Yet, today, until one of the two paradigms wins, it's hard to see how you reconcile. Again, this is not purely Palestinian. We've seen it in many other instances. We saw it in this country. We called it the Civil War. We saw it in Israel. We called it the Al-Talayna. We're in a very similar spot. Now, whoever is going to win is the one who can deliver, who can credibly deliver a message of hope about liberation to the Palestinian public. If negotiations and diplomacy can deliver, the PLO, Fatah, and some of the other seculars will be on the ascendants. If, however, we continue to see settlements, lack of progress, etc., Hamas's message will continue to be more appealing. I remember I was in Gaza during the Gaza disengagement. I was working for the Palestinian president. We tried to take credit for that. It was very difficult for us. Hamas had a very appealing soundbite. 10 years, 3 years of resistance beat 10 years of negotiations. And as a result, Hamas, using violence, capitalizing on violence, got street cred. So I think with Hamas and Fatah, it is this. I will quickly touch on 2 points. One point is the question of you have Hamas, you have Fatah, is there space for anything in between? Very hard to imagine right now. Palestinian politics is extremely polarized. I don't see the space, I don't see the mechanisms, but I do see a great space for creating shades within the two movements. Shades that already exist, but are often blurred as we talk about two big monoliths. And I think right now it's interesting to see what shades are happening and which trends within the two movements, and how can one look in empowering certain trends within that. The last point, and I think I'm going to stop at this, is the issue of Palestinian governance. Samih mentioned it. And this is an issue that is not only relevant to Palestinians, but I think it's an issue that's relevant to all of us who are looking at a two-state solution. Ultimately, for all of us, if we're voting about something, we don't only vote about the substance, we also vote about the messenger. about the candidate, about the person delivering the package to us. And it's the same in Palestine. Ultimately, when you ask the Palestinian public to vote on a peace deal, they will look at the terms of the peace deal, but they will look at the person and at the institution that signed the peace deal and say, are they credible? Can we trust them or can we not? And here is where the issue of governance, I think, becomes very important. The more that the Palestinian Authority can create a sense of legitimacy through lack of corruption, through democracy, through effectiveness, the more that its political behavior gets traction among the Palestinian populace. And therefore, it's very important to look at these issues. Today, we do have a prime minister, a new prime minister, unknown quantity. Many of the, so far, you know, he is maintaining many of the institutional reforms that we have seen under Prime Minister Fayyad, but that is an issue to keep a very close eye on. Then, if you wish, the traditional inertia of the Palestinian system, frankly, is to move away from institutionalization and reform. I think this is the core gut reaction of many in the Palestinian leadership and in the Palestinian political action. It needs the commitment of the president, it needs the commitment of the prime minister to maintain the reforms that we see in Palestine. Because ultimately, as I mentioned, this is not only important for Palestinians, but also important for us reaching a two-state solution. On the issue of security cooperation, I'm not too worried about that. I'm not too worried because I know where President Abbas stands on this one. I worked for President Abbas when he was prime minister and he was president. And I knew that he was willing and did pay a heavy political price for standing out very vocally against violence. And I think that he continues to believe in that. I have no concerns about that. And I have no concerns also about beyond President Abbas. I think we as Palestinian, as a former Palestinian negotiator, but others who are still there, understand with no security, there'll be no progress with Israel. If you want a two-state solution, you'd better take your security seriously. So I'm not worried about that. But what I will be looking at on the issue of security is not only cooperation, but the structural components of the security reforms that we saw over the last few years. Will they remain? Or will we start going back to the 90s, where the security services were actually tools of patronage as opposed to tools of security? So far, I don't see any disturbing signs, but I will continue looking at that. Again, I've tried to give some of my view in terms of where are some of the trends and the points of tension within Palestinian polity today, but ultimately, I think the Palestinian public, as they look at some of these trends, will continue looking at the core issue, the one that I mentioned before. Whoever can reach a peace deal, or whoever can reach a real promise, or can give a real promise of liberation, will be the one who will define Palestinian future. Those who do not will, at best, end up being junior partners in a system that's defined by other than them. This is not an issue that's only relevant to us as Palestinians. I think it's an issue that's relevant to the United States, as it's looking for a stable partner in the Middle East. And it's an issue that is extremely relevant to those who are pro-Israel, because without a credible Palestinian leadership, the chances for a two-state solution become extremely slim. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Arif. Do you want to pass the mic? Hussam.
Well, Nadia, good morning, everybody. Nadia forgot to mention that I am a Manchester United fan.
How do I know all this inside information, guys?
Meaning I am Fateh.
Okay.
I'm really delighted to be here. Really delighted on two counts. The first is being with you, the J Street, this conference, this gathering, this institution that we have been waiting for a long time. I heard you yesterday. I heard one of the founders, Mr. Gilo, who stood there and said that for many decades I haven't found an institution that would represent the true voice of me, the voice that carries the Jewish values. I am very inspired to be with you today. The second is that I'm also delighted to be back to the US. I spent a few years of my life here in Boston. Where is Liz? Liz yesterday introduced the Boston chapter. So I would be Manchester United and Red Sox at the same time. And I've lived in the US long enough to know that there is a lot to be done here. And I'll tell you a very short story. I first arrived to the US in the mid-90s as a young young student activist leader. I was invited by the US government administration. They took us all over the US, including to the very south, to Jackson, Mississippi, to meet, you know, the young leaders of America and the business and the politics. And then there I took a taxi by my own. The taxi driver noticed my accent. And he asked me, I was sitting in the back seat, where are you from, son? I said, I'm from Palestine. He said, oh, Pakistan. I know Pakistan. It's very... I said, no, sir, it's not Pakistan. It's Palestine. You know Palestine or the Middle East. He said, yeah, I know. You have all the herbs and things by India. I know Pakistan. I said, forget. Sir, it's not Pakistan. It's Palestine with an L. He noticed I started getting irritated. See, he looked me in the mirror and he said, son, no matter what you call it back there, in this country we call it Pakistan. And I know how much we need to do in this very country. I know that this country is a major players. And I want to tell you that we Palestinians forget about all the strategies and all the tactics since 1988, when we declared a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. Our one strategy was that in such a conflict, there can be only one equalizer to this conflict. That is the United States of America. And we have failed thus far to reach our destination. And your presence could not be more strategic, more timely, and this is your time to lead, definitely. I have 3 messages for you today. I have 3 messages. The first message is about our quest for UN membership, the UN side of the story, and the state building side of the story. And in the introduction to this panel, it was suggested as if the UN was a political confrontational act and as if state building was a domicile technocratic act. I don't think this is really the case. I think both the UN and the state building are purely political acts by the Palestinians. Purely political acts. Both are very connected to the fact that we Palestinians have decided to resist the status quo and occupation via non-violence. And our state building, and this political act was meant to ensure one main thing and to open the doors and the windows for another thing. The one thing we wanted to ensure is never to go back to the time of the lose-lose situation. Never to go back to the time when there is a tit for tat. And I am happy to report to you that we have been 120% successful. I am happy that the year 2012, there was no one Israeli killed in the West Bank. I am happy that the security situation in the last few years have made it possible for the Israeli economy to again flourish. I am happy that the situation in Tel Aviv is almost as normal as any other place. Happy. The problem was not in our success. All this was political, primarily meaning or leading to us building a momentum towards backrolling the status quo. However, as the introduction of this panel suggests, that we may have a Palestinian prime minister outgoing and we may have a new one, so we might have a problem in this strategy and this approach. The problem was never the Palestinian prime minister. The outgoing one was a marvelous human being who wanted to turn into the positive energy of Palestinians, and the incoming one is the same. The problem was with an Israeli prime minister. Bibi, who took our success, who took our positive energy, who took our ability to convince our people that providing security for the occupier and for our own people is to the best national interest for us, who took our success in building state-like institutions, getting certificates from all over, not as a reason for backrolling occupation, but as a reason to entrench occupation, to entrench the settlements, to deepen the colonization. It turned from a national asset to us into a national burden, the state building. Why? Because the status quo, which is a very deteriorating status quo, has become a status quo that is very comfortable to the Israeli prime minister. Never in the history of mankind you have a status quo as such whereby occupation is almost like a 5-star occupation. You can order, actually. We have delivery there, if you, whatever you want. Laundry, we have a problem with laundry. I mean, zero cost, thanks to the Palestinian Authority, thanks to us, to the Manchester fans. Zero cost. We pay. We fought the bill, thanks to the international community as well. Perfect security situation. Well, the direct occupation before the Oslo could not have done what we are doing. There is absolutely no sense of crisis in Israel, among even the public, no sense of urgency. Add to that, there is a lot of profiteering from the occupation. Should I mention to you some numbers? Yes. Should I? I mean, they are using 60% of our land that is the most fertile in the West Bank. Forget about this whole argument that the Jordan Valley is the biggest existential threat for Israel. From where? By who? The Jordan Valley has the main resources of the West Bank. It's the food basket of the West Bank. It's where the water aquifer of the West Bank. It's where they just found oil in the West Bank. Should I tell you about the amount of consumption of water that we do as opposed to them? Should I go into the discovery of oil in the Rantis area, which is to the west of the West Bank? Should I mention the $4 billion every year worth of goods dumped into our captive economy? The list goes on. The list goes on and on and on and on. While this profiteering, you know, the industries that are existing in the West Bank settlements are huge industries, and this is not a revelation by me. Every single study suggests that 70% of the settlers in the West Bank are there for economic reasons, not political or ideological. So what do we do? What do we do when the status quo that is deteriorating by the day, minus, not positive, not plus, that is comfortable, there is no pain, and actually there's no pleasure even for Mr. Netanyahu? This is the question that is really facing us, all of us. And here again comes our quest as Palestinian leadership to try and create a bloodless sense of crisis among the Israeli ordinary public. Because the Israelis are no different, my friends. They are like us. You know, I'll tell you something. If I was in the seat of Mr. Netanyahu, I might behave the same, if I'm so comfortable. Regrettably, for the average Israeli man and woman, the conflict could be in Tanzania, in Malaysia. There is a wall. We have no problems here. Our income is 30 times theirs. We consume 8 times the water they consume. Have you ever heard in the history of mankind, and Israelis are just as normal as us, exceptionalism or all this, that a nation or a society or a group would give up their privileges voluntarily just because they are nice or we are nice? Just because we can convince them more? Why would you give up your swimming pool in the West Bank because your neighbor is telling you, I can't water, I don't have water to drink? Unless you are convinced that if you don't share half of your pool with that neighbor, you will lose all of your pool, you will not share it. If you are an Israeli, American, British, Palestinian, or any humankind. That's the truth. And the biggest obstacle we have right now is not a framework. We all know what's the framework. Ask any of you. You will know what would be the contours of a two-state solution. It's not really the lack of our ability to convince. I think we have won. The people who believe in the two-state solution have won the moral argument, the political argument, the legal argument. Where we all lost is the material, is the facts on the ground, is the viciousness of the status quo minus and those who benefit from it directly, is the business-linked interest in this whole status quo. And therefore, I'd like to go to my point 3 here. And point 3 is that we Palestinians, as exactly was mentioned by Dr. Samih El-Abed and earlier by our good friend, the lawyer, Ghaith, we also we Palestinians also have politics. Can you believe? No, nobody mentions that we have politics and we have parties and we have. Number one, I think President Abbas has yet again shown that he is not a politician. This man is a statesman. And there is such a difference between politicians and statesmen. A statesman is somebody who has his eye very fixated on the long term, on the destination, on the goal, on the finish line. Not tactical in any way. Believing firmly in every word he says, in public and private. No calculations as to how much he is popular or unpopular. And as Ghaith said, his decision to go back yet again to the negotiation is the most unpopular decision in the Palestinian public. Not only in the Palestinian public, but in fact, and it's not a secret, he faced huge, unprecedented opposition from within his own Manchester United fans, meaning Fatah. And from the PLO Executive Committee. And he argued his case and stood his grounds and pressed ahead, and we are now negotiating. And last week, I think you may have heard him, he announced in the UN, in front of everybody, his intentions, his program, his vision for that peace. It's very clear. I'm not gonna, I plan to quote him for you here. But it's there, the speech is there. Please read it. I think it is really said in a way that all of us should know the way ahead as clear as possible. But I'll tell you one thing, and I'll say it from my heart, really from my heart. I believe that Mahmoud Abbas is the absolute last chance for the two-state solution. Not because the Palestinian people would abandon the two-state solution, no. But because nobody other than Mahmoud Abbas will be or will dare to convince the Palestinian people that it is possible anymore. And what Ghaith started by saying how grave the situation is, it is grave. It is. All of us are at the edge right now. All of us. Fatah, Hamas. And there are so many speculations. You know, those to the very far left and the progressive are saying we have to go for the democratic state, the one-state situation. And we keep telling them, for God's sake, this is the status quo. The status quo is a one-state formula. There is only one government in control of the historic land of Palestine, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. We're trying to break away from the status quo. Oh, but we're going to seek democratic rights. Said who? Said who? We're going to get democratic rights. And I'm sorry, do the Palestinians of Israel, the citizens of Israel, have full rights? Why do I want to go through that? I want my own state. I might aspire for virtual borders. I am a European citizen, by the way. I might aspire that we will have borders so we just satisfy our sense of nationhood and statehood, but we can move freely. But we have to have the two states. And there are other people to the very right, like Danny Danon, 2 days ago in the New York Times, if you read it, who said, we have to abandon Oslo, we have to end all this, and we have to go for the three-state solution. You know what's the three-state solution in the head of Danny Danon? The three-state solution is a state in the West Bank, a state in Gaza, and a state in Israel. But actually, that's what he said in the article in the New York Times. But what he meant, in effect, was not really 3 states. He meant 4 states. A state in Gaza, standalone. A state for settlers in the West Bank. Seriously. What they mean by two-state solution, these people, is 2 states in the West Bank. And a state for the Palestinians and the leftovers, with some coordination arrangement with Jordan. And Israel. That's the propagation. Well, I want to tell him through you today that he is absolutely mistaken. The choice is, and read my lips, is either between the 2 states or the no state. That's the only 2 choices we have. Either the 2 states or a no state. And I mean by no state to Israel, because Israel can never be a normal state without final borders. And Palestine can never be a state without Gaza. And Palestine can never be a state without East Jerusalem, its capital. So if this is the status quo and the main controllers of Israel right now are there thinking, we are, I am afraid, might move into the no state era, which means a non-solution era. Well, I want to end at a much more hopeful, much more optimistic. And I am, by the way. I am. I'll tell you why. Much hopeful. It's very important to know the dangers and the threats, so we are alert. Sometimes you really have to hit it on the head, especially in such a very important forum like this. You are people who came from all over the US and all over the world because you are committed to an idea. We don't want just to, congratulate each other. This is the reality on the ground. But the optimistic side of the story is really this absolute unprecedented momentum and wave all over the place that I didn't see in the many, many years I've been in this business around really reaching a two-state solution in the coming 9 years, 9 months, I'm sorry. I see it, I feel it. I think Secretary Kerry is a very, very serious man. He knows exactly why he should do that. He said it. And he said what I tried to say earlier, that the window is closing. He knows it's the interest of Israel. He knows it will bring a lot of stability to the region. He's very knowledgeable, personally committed. President Obama has tried. President Obama is backing the Secretary of the State. And I believe President Obama has made himself absolutely clear in Jerusalem. And his speech, by the way, to the Israeli people struck as much of a chord to the Israelis as much of the Palestinians. Yeah. Because when he stood to the Israelis and said firmly that put yourself in their shoe, that is the time when the Palestinians listened. Because they wanted a leader to stand and tell the Israelis that this is not just about your security. This is not just about your rights. This is not just about your narratives. This is not just about your interests. It's also about the narratives of the others, the rights of the others, the sufferings and the grievances of the others. And 20 years ago, I would have been shot if I go back to Palestine, having just met you now. Things are not going back, it's going forward. And I don't think you would have even invited me 20 years ago as a representative of the PLO and Fatah and this platform. The whole nonsense of the denial of one another, the denial of the existence of one another is over. It's over. Today, we are just talking about some status quos that are entrenching.
I hate to interrupt you, Hassan, but your time is way out.
And Tayyip, thank you.
Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I was hoping that all of you were going to be inspired by the end of the panel, but you already are inspired. And I thought the Manchester United fans are always passionate, but I've never seen as passionate as this one, so for sure. Okay, I don't know how much time we left now, but just let me go through a very quick round of questions before I open the floor for the audience. And let me start with Samih, because he's the first to speak. I think Hussam has outlined the pictures eloquently about the cause of the occupation, and basically the Israelis are very comfortable now. So how do you make the occupation costly for Israel in a non-violent way?
Thank you very much. I would like to speak about something a little different, because everybody here speaks about the two-state solution. And I would like to understand from you and others where that state will be. Is anybody knows in his mind where the state of Palestine is? According to the past experience from negotiation with all, it's not only a talk about the two-state solution. It is to know where is that space for the state of Palestine. And we are talking about the border of 1967. And we, the Palestinians, we talked about a swab area, which is a concession from the Palestinian side. We talked about security issue, a demilitarized or whatever less than that. It is a concession from the Palestinian issue. What is in the mind of the Israelis about thinking about the two-state solution? What is the mind of you here in J Street thinking about the two-state solution? Where the state of Palestine will be? Do you have a map for that to show us? This is the main problem here. And I have to tell you something, that what we mean by the two-state solution here. We need our freedom, we need our dignity, and we need our opportunity for the future for our children and grandchildren. Freedom means the end of occupation. Dignity is the state of Palestine and the future for our children. In order to be part of the international community, they have the chance, like you have it here, for a future prospect for them. We will never accept freedom minus. We will never accept dignity minus. We will never accept a future for our children minus than anybody else in the world. This is where you should map in your mind where will be the state of Palestine. The state of Palestine is well known for us. Unfortunately, it is not known for the Israelis when we go and negotiate with them. Institution and others, I'm not against any country in the whole world, but would you think that when they recognize the state of Southern Sudan, do they have institution capacity more than the Palestinians? They have. We have our own institution there, but the whole world was playing, unfortunately, an equal game. They want us to be a good governance, a good state building, everything under occupation. Yet we done it perfectly than any other nations around us in the region, and yet we haven't got any, at least acknowledgement from our neighbors here that this is our aspiration and this is what we all looking forward. We need to have our freedom and dignity and our opportunity for the future by having our state. And the talks that is taking place right now, unfortunately till now, it's stand still. We heard from the Israelis what we heard from them since 2000, year 2000,
So
till now.
How can we make the occupation costly for Israel?
Well, I hate to think this way because I want to have a two-state solution. I want to have peace with the Israelis more than to make any cost for them, and I don't want them to make any cost for me as well. It's one solution of no state, like Hossam said, there will be no state for both of us, unfortunately.
Okay, now we're really running out of time. So I'm going to pass on my questions. I'm going to open the floor for the audience. Please identify yourself and make a question, no comments, because we have so many people. Address it to the panelists, and please, precise questions. Go ahead.
I'm Dr. Caroline Poplin. I'm from Bethesda, Maryland. My question is about Prime Minister Fayyad. Why did he leave, and what was the political result of that?
Thank you. Maybe we take 3 questions at the time, just to make it easy.
I actually have a comment, but I'll try to phrase it as a question.
Please.
The question, how can you justify, this is to Hassan, how do you justify saying that political actions such as state building and going to the United Nations constitute nonviolent resistance when the world knows that nonviolent resistance means peaceful protest that is visible for the world to see, that can motivate Israelis and Americans to work for a two-state solution.
Thank you.
And that is what is missing. Sorry
you.
about the comment.
Sure. 3rd question.
I'm Sarah Pattison from Davis, California. In the final agreement, what do you see happening for Arab refugees from 1948, Muslim religious sites in Jerusalem, and will Jews be permitted to remain in the future Palestinian state if they choose?
Thank you. Let's start with Raith. You want to take the first question?
Sure. But before I actually take that, maybe a word about Pakistan in defense of the South. I don't know if you remember, Samih, back I think in 2099, we came to a negotiation session here in Bolling Air Force Base. I look at the agenda from the State Department. It talks about the Israeli-Pakistani peace process. So it's not only Jackson, Mississippi, but even Fayyad.
Israeli-Pakistani.
Okay. Fayyad, let me start with that one. With Fayyad, I would say and this is maybe where I would have a bit of a difference with you, Hussam. Fayyad left for two reasons, in my view. One is he was let down by what he thought would be supporters and partners in Israel and in the US. When the Palestinians went to the UN, the response of the US and the response of Israel was to punish the Palestinians in the one thing that was going right, by defunding the PA, by squeezing in the West Bank from a security institutional point of view. He felt that at that point his project was being undermined as a bystander, as a collateral damage of wanting to score political points on the high politics. And I think there's a lesson for us here in the States and elsewhere. As we get angry, let's make sure that we do not throw the baby with the bathwater. Ultimately, as Hussam said, that was a political project of self-empowerment that sadly was not reciprocated by any of the, not only partners, but also beneficiaries of that thing in Israel and the United States. But part of his departure was domestic politics. And this is where I think it behooves us all to look at Palestinian politics not simply as a byproduct of the occupation. The occupation frames, the occupation defines, the occupation nudges and pulls, but ultimately Palestinian politics is domestic. And a lot of Fayyad's failure is frankly Fatah as an organization not being able to absorb and to deal with some of his institutionalization processes, whether in security or in other aspects of governance. And there has been and was an ongoing campaign against Fayyad. Fatah wanted someone who will not say no, or some in Fatah, I would say, wanted someone who will not stand in their way as they engage in some of the old shenanigans. I think Fayyad is out. We have a new prime minister, again, not Fatah. There's nothing to indicate that he will be different from Fayyad, but we will look. But ultimately, this is one of the questions that Manchester United itself, that Fatah itself will have to resolve within itself. Is this a party that is forward-looking, that is willing to change some of its bad behavior in the past, or is this a stale party that ultimately will ultimately fragment and not be able to rule? In terms of one quick, the last question, the future of holy sites, etc., etc. I would say two things on this. Ultimately, you will have to have two states with one border, with one border regime, etc., etc. This does not, though, mean that we should not have arrangements for Muslims, Christians who want to visit holy sites, historic sites, identity sites in Israel, and vice versa in Palestine. This is something very possible. If you look at the Geneva Initiative that I was involved in my past, we made some of these arrangements. Ultimately, we have to look at a peace deal as two things. On the one hand, it is a divorce, whereby we have to really split assets very clearly. It's a divorce of two spouses who will be living in the same house. So also you have to make arrangements for making life between the two sides livable. About Jews in Palestine, I think there's a big difference between talking about post-independence. Will Jews be allowed, not be allowed? This becomes, as far as I'm concerned, an immigration issue, as opposed to the settlements remaining within a Palestinian state. And I remember in one of the negotiation sessions in the late 90s, we, as Palestinian negotiators, suggested the idea of settlers staying as green card holders. The biggest pushback we got was from the Israeli intelligence and security community. Meaning, how do you protect them? How do you ensure that they do not become a flashpoint? As far as I'm concerned, any peace process or any peace deal is weakest, most vulnerable at the beginning. This is where the spoilers come in. If we keep flashpoints, like settlements, etc., within the Palestinian state, you can be sure that these will be flashpoints and will be rallying points for violence. As far as I'm concerned, until I hear a convincing security argument that tells me that keeping settlements as settlements in the future Palestinian state can be managed from a security point of view, I personally will be against it, because I want a peace deal that is stable, that allows both countries to move on and not be stuck with problems of the past.
Thank you, Hussam.
I just want to tackle the Fayyad. I agree with you. I don't know why we disagree. You know, we have to disagree about something. Well, the Manchester United wanted a Messi in the team, and you know, we got. Well, I don't want to tackle the UN issue. The UN is violence. We are not joining Al-Qaeda, for God's sake, or the mafia, or God forbid APAC. We are joining the United. Is this filmed? We are joining the United Nations. The universal values upon which the State of Israel was established. Israel would not have been here without the UN. And we are not seeking a sole recognition to the State of Palestine. Every country we have recognition by has recognized Israel. We have enabled Israel to be recognized by the vast majority when we were recognized as a state on 22% of historic Palestine. And state building is violent. State building was primarily meant to really provide for the Palestinians, ensure that while the status quo minus is really depriving them of all the potential that is possible, at least we can maximize the margin in between that. That is our ability to build our own institutions and impose law and order and provide security for the occupier and the settlers. The one last word about will the Palestinian state accept Jews to live in it? I'm very, I'm aware of the stereotype, and I'll tell you one thing: security arrangements. We will get the security experts to talk about it. But I am very proud of my society for two reasons. The first is that this society is absolutely, the Palestinian society, is very familiar with the idea and the practice of inclusivity, and the practice of absorbing one another. I live with my colleagues in the office for years. I wouldn't know who's Christian and who's Muslim. We don't even ask that question. We don't ask that question. The Armenians came to Palestine less than 100 years ago, and now they are ambassadors of Palestine and everywhere, as Manuel Hassassian. We are a society that is capable to absorb the others, number one. Number two, our constitution that is being drafted, and I'm happy to send you the draft, and it's online actually, would enable a Jewish woman to be the president of the state of Palestine, and I am so proud of that. The question is about illegality. Once we end illegalities, those who stole our land, if I am a judge in the Palestinian state and the Palestinian farmer comes to me and says, that man, Shlomo, has taken my land and here's the deed, and he's took it by force, and then I, as a judge, give a court order to evacuate, then hell broke loose. So this is about the arrangements, not about the principle of Jews living in the state of Palestine. I think this state of Palestine must attract as many Jews as possible for its own prosperity and future fabrics. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if we have time. Where's Kevin?
Hello, I'm Alan Haber from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I have several related questions on democracy. Does Fatah support the notion of a referendum among the Palestinian people as to some settlement that might be reached after 9 months? And would that referendum include refugees in the camps and refugees in the diaspora? And related to that, from what I understand in many trips to Palestine, there's a lot of resentment about Fatah when it came back from Tunisia, undercutting the local democracy that had created the communities in Palestine. And out of that local democracy came the notion of the boycott, sanction, and divestment. You have protest, nonviolent, and this was the question the moderator asked about what is a nonviolent approach, and how does Fatah address that boycott, sanctions, and divestment in terms of how J Street and Americans should approach this effort to influence the Israeli public opinion and Israeli economy?
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Renee Shalom. I am a freshman at Princeton University. And my question is in response to Samsun Lot's talk about the economic minuses that exist in Palestine. Given all the economic and political obstacles that exist in West Bank, why is it in the interests of the people of West Bank, who have to hurdle all these huge obstacles, in addition to have to deal with the issues in Gaza? Why is it in their interest to have a joint state with Gaza? And if it is in the interest of the people of West Bank to have a joint state of Gaza, what are the actual policy objectives of the Palestinian leadership in West Bank to encourage the revolution of the autocratic government of Hamas in Gaza? How is this going to happen?
Thank you.
Earl Bard from Pennsylvania. I wanted to ask you about pressures against normalization. I don't know, as esteemed leaders, if you get more of this or if you get less of it. And, you know, it affects us at J Street more than it does at some of the other Jewish organizations that really aren't even very interested in hearing you speak.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm really biased towards women, so I'm going to allow this lady to ask a quick question, and we have the round of answers. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Danielle Fultz from Ohio University. And as to the title of this panel, Future of Palestinian Leadership, my question is, are there any forums or institutions that are teaching or encouraging good governance practices for young Palestinians?
Thank you. Okay, Hussam, you'll take all the Fatah questions, so go ahead. The Manchester United, I mean.
Oh, God help me.
Please be quick.
On the question of referendum, sir, yes, I think the Palestinian leadership has already publicly announced that any final agreement with end of claims would be offered to the Palestinians, and the Palestinians are very well defined in our charter as the PLO and the PA. That includes the Palestinians of the 67 and the Palestinians in the diaspora. And I believe this has been almost the glue between all Palestinians, those inside and outside the PLO, meaning even Hamas has said that Abu Mazen has the full legitimacy. Now, when the division is happening, to negotiate on our behalf as Hamas, because Hamas recognized the PLO, by the way, as the legitimate representative of the Palestinians. They just want to get in. And their getting in is still, we're having some difficulties between Manchester United and what's the other one, the Arsenal. Getting in with 51% is not exactly the Arsenal share. The main point I want to make here about the referendum is our ability to affirm 100% of the Palestinian society in a way or another willing to accept any deal. And it's in the interest of the deal. About this, the BDS, and I know one has asked, I mean, you know, I know sometimes the word sanctions doesn't really, it's not, God forbid sanctions, but I personally believe that sometimes you have to exactly do what the Right Honorable John Lewis said yesterday. He said that you have to do good troubles. Remember? Sometimes you have to do good troubles. You have to undertake this. America would not have been the place it is today, diverse and equal, without that good trouble that these people have undertaken with the active participation of the Jewish community. And we have two choices, either armed struggle and violence and blood, or non-violence. And BDS is a non-violent way of putting pressure on the status quo. Please support it.
So that's a non-costly, how to make the occupation costly.
And the last, how can we make did I answer it? A state in Gaza and no, I'll just answer the state in Gaza, that's all. And then I'll refer to my colleagues. The question is, why do we want to have a joint state with Gaza? I mean, my friend, this is not just about a piece of territory or about a piece of property. It's not a real estate issue. We are a nation with great roots. Come and dance Dabki with us and see how much we really, sometimes. And we are a nation that sees itself as a nation connected in destiny and in history. Gaza has 70% of its population who came from what is Israel now, refugees. Gaza's eyes are never on Gaza or their own standalone entity. They want to see themselves part of that Palestinian proud self sort of nationhood. What do you mean, why do we want to join Gaza? This is not the Netherlands. These are Palestinians. And therefore I tell you, even from a very pragmatic, practical point of view, you want to establish a Palestinian state in the West Bank, and then what to Gaza? What to Gaza? You want to push it to Egypt? It's not going to happen. I tell you, the Egyptians, it's a red line. They will never accept it. Then you keep it there as a standalone entity whereby it is the cause of all problems and issues and evil. Gaza today, as we speak, has been cut off of electricity, of main supplies, of medical supplies, because the Egyptians closed the tunnels, and I'm glad they did, but Israel is not opening the northern borders as they should. We should not look at Gaza as Hamas. Gaza is not Hamas. When Manchester United did their foundation anniversary in Gaza, on the 4th of January this year, 1,200,000 Gazans took off to the street to support Fatah. 1,200,000. Go back to the CNN estimates. That's 70% of the Gaza population supporting Fatah. Gaza is not Hamas. And there is a great deal of way to actually enable and empower the people of Gaza to get rid of the status quo. By enabling them, empowering them, opening them for the access, the more empowered, the more rich, the less poor Gazans, the more able they are to have political aspirations and challenge the status quo. And this is where I end, the last 5-6 years of business by the Israeli government and by the US, of suffocating Gaza so they will de-elect Hamas, of closing off, of depriving Gaza of the very basic human abilities, was exactly counterproductive and played exactly in the hands of Hamas. A more prosperous Gaza, a prosperous Gaza with access. I am a Gazan, by the way. I was born in Gaza.
Me too.
I was born in Gaza, and I am a refugee. My father and my parents come from where Israel is now, next by Ashdod, a small village. And I know what is Gaza, and I know the refugee camps in Gaza. And I know that Gaza, historically, was the source of all issues and the source of all solutions. Forget it, you can never just wash Gaza in the sea, as once said by an Israeli prime minister. That's it.
Okay, James, do you want to add something else, Samih? Because we really have to close. I don't think we can. I'm so sorry. We just told that the panel is about to finish. So
if I may just...
let me just quickly, let me apologize for the people who want to ask questions and ask them just to seek the panel individually after the session. Go ahead.
If I may just again quickly, 2 points, you touched upon them, but I have to, one is the issue of BDS, and this is where I might disagree with you, Hussam, in that while it is important, I believe, I support boycotting the occupation and the results of the occupation. I'm against boycotting Israel. Ultimately, I think the occupation is illegitimate and we have to act accordingly, but Israel is legitimate. And BDS, sadly, affects our allies in Israel, whether it's in the center or the left or what have you. Referendum. In theory, diaspora, yes. In practice, is very complicated. Jordan. Who's a Palestinian, who is not? You're opening a Pandora's box. Syria, well, I'm not going to talk about Syria. Lebanon. But there are real complexities to this. In my view, ultimately, practically, the referendum will have to be in the West Bank and Gaza, but the PLO has to start finding new ways of reaching out to the diaspora. Gaza, I couldn't agree with you more. Gaza is not Hamas. I believe Hamas has to be boycotted personally and squeezed, yet by besieging Gaza, we're strengthening Hamas, and that is not healthy. If I may, just one last word. I am actually, I live in Washington. I don't live in Palestine. For me, this is a distant issue. Yet, as I observe it, I see two kinds of Palestinians. Putting aside Hamas, Fatah, etc., etc., I see two kinds of Palestinians. I see those who are very comfortable living in their victimhood, whining, talking about how bad things are, and doing nothing about it. And I see people like Samih, like Hussam, who are actually looking at the future of Palestine, looking at how do we create energy for Palestinians. How do we have a Palestinian state that's not only living with Israel, but that's actually worthy of being called a state for its own citizens. Yes, South Sudan got a state without institutions, yet the Palestinians, I believe, deserve a state with institutions. It is our job in the States. It's my job, working in a few blocks down from here. It's everyone's job to ensure that those who hold these energetic, forward-looking views are supported. Not in the old, bear hug way, but us pushing our government here to create policies that will enable them to succeed. Because ultimately, if someone like my co-panelist succeeds, the future Palestinian state will be a contribution to the region. If they fail, and the whiners and those who are reactionary win, then frankly, I would have seen my own career of working with the Palestinian state as a big failure. And the price is not going to be paid by Palestinians, but by Israelis, Jordanians, and American national interests in the region.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I told you this is a popular panel, and they live to expectations. So a big round for all of them, Hussam, Reis, and Samih. Thank you all for coming.